So I went home and paid back my country by becoming a Democrat. I had been an independent. I ran on one refrain in a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district. I'm a retired Navy admiral, running on national security that begins at home, in health security. I won that district to become the second Democrat since the Civil War. I then was reelected by 20 points. I raised $3 million, but I didn't spend a penny of it on a single campaign ad. I had an F from the NRA. I had 100% from NARAL, 100% from National Organization of Women, 95% from the Human Rights Campaign. Somehow the Republicans and I, we learned how to disagree well. We had some things in common, but when we disagreed, we got together. Saturday morning, you had to care if you disagreed with me on an issue. We'd ask groups to come in, whether it was on gun control or whether it was on choice. And I'd stay there, 8 o'clock in the morning, you had to care, and I had skin in the game, but I asked them to come in and we would talk. We'd send letters and emails to those who had written us. There were times, though, that I disagreed with my party. You may remember a senator named Arlen Specter. He was a Republican who had tried to humiliate Anita Hill when she had brought her discrimination allegations against now Supreme Court. And my party embraced it. I disagreed. I have 6 sisters. I put a video out about the hearings, and I ran against my party's desires. I did not think that should be the man who should represent the Congress, represent Pennsylvania as its senator. I was 40 points down as my party's establishment supported Senator Specter. But the people, Democrats and Republicans in Pennsylvania, disagreed. And I won. But I also learned something, that in politics it's better to offend God than a politician. Because at least God gives forgiveness. And I didn't have hardly any support, very little, in the general, and I didn't win the year of the Tea Party. I remember 40,000 or so votes out of millions. I don't remember the exact number. But I was very fortunate that it occurred. Because I was at least at home when my daughter's brain cancer came back last year. She's probably the only one who's ever survived glioblastoma, single-digit odds twice. I never was going to get in, but I decided to because I owed this nation a second time. But I'm running for a different reason than I did the first time, where I needed to pay back my country for health care. And I had taken, in 2005, it hadn't been passed yet, Massachusetts health care plan, which became known later as Romneycare. And I put it on my website and said, that's why I'm running. This time it's different. When I sat with my daughter this time, as she went through the burning radiation, which tires her brain out, and she would sleep during the day, as we came back to Mass General, I thought a lot. I thought about the times when I was in the Arabian Sea and I arrived there, and 20 ships were waiting to become part of my American battle. International ships. The Japanese were there. They had not been outside the Sea of Japan since the Second World War, when my father had fought. And the Italian Minister of Defense said it well for why they all had come. America has been attacked, and we will be there for them. We have the world with us against evil. But then I was told to take a left turn and go through the Straits of Hormuz to begin the precursor strikes against Iraq. And only a couple of those nations went with us. Right then I knew that they recognized what those Democrats and Republicans alike did not, who voted for that tragic misadventure. That they did not understand that when you use our military, you better know how it's going to end before you decide to begin. Because, as I said earlier, militaries can stop a problem. They can never fix the problem. That decision which unleashed Shia against Sunni and Sunni against Shia. And then former General Saddam Hussein created ISIS, which then metastasized and went through the Middle East and beyond, which even led eventually in a domino effect to Turkey invading Syria the other day, as we abandoned Kurdish allies against ISIS. And now they are allied with the most brutal dictator, Assad. It's because very few understand this world and have the breadth and depth of global experience, and so important today when you saw again just what happened as China told Apple, shut down that app today, just this week, that the protesters in Hong Kong were using to coordinate. Just like it forced the NBA to all of a sudden come to a halt, and because they were out there, one person tweeting about its violations in Hong Kong. Or Marriott fired an employee in Kansas because it happened to do a little tweet about Tibet. There's an illiberal, authoritarian world order that's arising. And we haven't come to grips with how to handle that. It doesn't mean our military. We took care of Iran when it had this nuclear warfare making capability. They were to have 2 devices in 60 days when we convened the world, which is our nation's greatest power, even including strange bedfellows, China and Russia, and forced them through economic and diplomatic means to remove that nuclear warfare making capability. And then we broke our word and think we're going to fix it when we already had with our military with a potential strike. Militaries will stop the problem. We won't fix it. So we better have someone wise. But then in that commander-in-chief position, could you look at that? And but the second thing is, I never forgot those. I had to keep my office open 7 days a week when I entered Congress, to 9 o'clock every night. Saturdays and Sundays included, rotating interns underneath my staff, because we were in a third war, the Great Recession. We handled 4 times the constituency cases of the average congressional office. We saved over 800 homes. And as I sat with my daughter, what I began to think about was not one politician, not one, has ever answered for themselves for the carnage from that war that they voted for. Not one politician has ever accounted for themselves for the carnage, for their votes over time and across the political spectrum, where they tore down the one place in America we definitely need a wall to keep greed out and accountability in. And when they tore that wall down, the inaptly named Wall Street was left unfettered to destroy mine and millions of others' constituencies' livelihoods. And during that period of time, 450 congressmen and senators have taken a lobbying job. I know, I saw those offers. And their revenue for those who took it, those 450, has increased 400% during that period of time. Mr. Trump is not the problem. He's the symptom of a problem. But this unaccountable leadership is really what has led to this lack of trust in America today, where we've forgotten of whom we are and what we can be when united together. I am running because I believe what America most needs is, yes, to beat Mr. Trump, for no other reason than our character. But we need someone who can heal this nation's soul, who can unite America once again, as it was from John F. Kennedy to Ronald Reagan's times, to where we understood we had more in common than we did in differences, to where we can actually no longer have a president, which we've had twice now, that by and large can only do executive orders and the next one rips them out. If we are ever to achieve the goals that America must, abroad or at home, we must have a united America. So come aboard an aircraft carrier as I am. If you've ever been on board one, there's 5,000 sailors. Their average age is 19 and a half. If you don't believe in the youth of America, you should come aboard an aircraft carrier. I love them because they're not burdened with experience. They actually are willing to use their brains and see things differently, and you can trust them. When a pilot gets in a plane, they turn on their engines. They strap the pilot into a catapult. They push a button, and off that plane goes, slinged into the air by the power of that catapult. If your engines are working, that pilot has one of the greatest rides of their life. Even New Hampshire doesn't have a better amusement park ride than that. But sometimes they tell the pilot to shut down their engines because they need a different plane over Afghanistan, or whatever the reason is. But that pilot waits until a young 19-and-a-half-year-old youth, could be from New Hampshire, could be from Pennsylvania, where I'm from, grew up, could be a Muslim, could be Hispanic, could be white. We just don't care. We just know they're going to do it right. Red state, blue state, just don't care. That youth comes underneath the belly of the plane in the middle of the night where the pilot can't see. Because before they turn off their engines, they want to know they've been unhooked. Because if you shut them off and someone makes a mistake and pushes that button, it's a great, but a final ride for you of your life. So that youth unhooks it, walks to the front of the plane, not the side, the front of the plane, and gives a very simple signal like that. And then does not move until that pilot has nodded, opened up the canopy after shutting off his or her engine, and gotten safely on deck. That youth, from anywhere in America, has told us what America most wants, most needs, and most yearns for today. Go ahead, pilot, you can trust me. Because I'm willing to be accountable. Not for my word, but for my deed. Because if I made a mistake, and after you turn off your engines, you start heading overboard to your death, you're going right through me. And I'm going overboard with you to my own. I've met few Americans, whether in Iowa, or across Pennsylvania, when I walk across Pennsylvania here, who believes people, those public officials in Washington, D.C., would stand in front of that plane for them. And that's what I want to do. I see no other way that we can bring this country together without someone who is willing to be, who will be trusted, because he is willing to be accountable to people, above party, above self, above any special interest, regardless of the consequences to oneself. And that's why I'm running for President and Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. Thank you. What station are you from?
Concord TV.
Wow, thanks for coming.
Welcome.
Very much. Any questions?
Sure. I understand your approach, but I think, and I don't know about other people here, but what I'm interested in is your stance on different issues. That's what I'm interested in particular with regard to health care. I mean, we just had a debate this past week, and we got to hear what each candidate and their take on each one of the issues. And I would be interested, if you could, give us your feelings and how you would go forth on some of these issues, because it really is important when I, the voter, has to go in there and check off a name. So, sorry for being a little bit presumptuous, but that's the way I am.
And that's why I laid them out on the back here.
Okay.
And because I think, I wrote a book in 2015 on policy issues. It's not one that said, I grew up in a log cabin, I'm ready to be president. It's really one that says, if I were to be in love, I would analyze it bit by bit, because you can't ask how or why enough. I'm a Napoleonic fan. I don't tell my wife that quote. But let's take healthcare. New Hampshire's going to lose 5 of your rural counties out of the 14 you have here in the next decade. Why? Because for-profit hospitals will no longer exist soon in rural counties as people are leaving them. We're going to lose 527 rural hospitals across America out of the 2,500 and some we have. I was going through that where I just came from, living in Econolodge 9. Medicare for All is based on a for-profit hospital. So what are we going to do for the rural counties? Because if you don't have a hospital there, what small business is ever going to go there? And besides that, Medevac costs the Iowans today, because they've lost rural counties, $36,000, even when they have insurance to get Medevac for an emergency. That's how much one Medevac. So I voted for the public option when I was in Congress. And our Senate didn't have the guts to stand up to the healthcare industry. But we do want to try to have a public option. Why? We need several public options. And they should be called a transition of choice. One goes towards Medicare for All to see how it's going to work. The other goes towards the VHA, the Veterans Hospital, which the New England Journal of Medicine has rated #1 and equal to or better than any private or public health care provider in the nation. Rand Corporation just revalidated that. That's why I think, which no one talks about, our rural, because we tend, that's often where the Trump supporters are, and we forget about it. And we got to unite this country. So, and that's why I wanted to say my policies fit right into that, is what we want is a public option that tests out, can we have, like England, a public-owned hospital? Because the Medicare for All hospitals, Johns Hopkins, University of Penn aren't going to go in there. They can't make money, and they're for profit. So that's one way. The other public option goes towards Medicare for All. But why do I call it a transition of choice? Because remember, Medicare pays about 40% less to many hospitals than private insurance. So are the doctors all going to stay, or are they not going to stay for that lower hospital? So what we need is to remember that 255 million Americans, including me, are on Medicaid or some sort of private health care. I'm a military guy, retired. TRICARE, military health care, is run by Humana. If someone had told me in 2 or 4 years you're going to rip my health care off and force me into somewhere else, and the same medical heroes were in that health care plan, I would storm the gates of the White House. What you want is a transition of choice, public option, one, just like the VHA mini, and people get to choose to go into it, to test it. Why? Because the military, you learn piss poor planning is piss poor execution. Remember, we have a government that beat China, Japan and Germany in 4 years, and we could not roll out a healthcare website for the Affordable Care Act in 4 years. We need somebody who knows how to run government. And that's why we can't lose the trust of people as we transition. If it works and more people get in because it proves it's lower cost, better benefits, better health care, and more accessible, we continue to go, and maybe down the road 6 or 8 years you say, okay, now this group is going to be moving in over the next years. But you're testing it as you go.
Right.
And it's a choice. And then you have one towards Medicare for All. Do we want the middleman to go away? You bet we do. I got a $300,000 bill from the healthcare companies because they would not approve the one thing drug that might save my daughter. She couldn't go through the chemotherapy again. It was so horrendously hard. She was racked by it. Children died from it. But it's all they could give them. Now they gave her a drug for metastasized breast cancer. It hadn't been approved. It wasn't approved for this, so I set aside the first $50,000 my wife and I did to pay. We finally won an appeal. Take your fishing ports here in New England. They got rid of the middleman, except for Gloucester, Massachusetts. Point Judith, all of them did. What did they do? They said, I'm not going to sell to that middleman to take my fish to sell it to Boston's restaurants. They formed a fishing cooperative. That's what we want to do. We've got to make sure it works. We take the middleman out. Why do we need health insurance if the government can pay the hospital directly? But the change in that is going to take time, thought, or anything. So that's what I believe in healthcare. Do we have to do other things like, right now, there's a law passed 2003 that Medicare cannot negotiate for best price. I can get drugs at the VA for like 1/3 the cost as they can for Medicare because we're beginning to negotiate for best price. There's many other things to do with that. But let me transition over to also what we have to do. Your unemployment rate here in New Hampshire would be 7.6%. I know you say it's 5.1 from 7.6, 2.5%. I think you have a very low unemployment rate, correct? Mm-hmm. But if you included the workforce who has left
the economy, because they don't have the skills anymore, and there's 12 million of them across America. Our labor participation rate is only 63%. It used to be 67% in the Clinton era. We didn't like the peace and prosperity. And so those are those artisans who work with their brains and their hands. I just went to the Granite State, as I walk across Pennsylvania, I visited your prison here, Cheshire Prison, as you know, it's the most progressive prison in America. I went to the trade school here, Granite Trade School, to make the point that 65% of Americans don't have a college degree. What are we doing for them? We spend less than any developed nation on labor force training, 0.001% of GDP. So in my book, I sold 6 copies, I have proposed training for a lifetime. It's what we do in the military. When a guy or gal loses a job because the F-15, the mechanic of the F-15, it goes out of business, we don't do what we do when you lose your job because of a coal mine shuts down because natural gas has shut it down and soon climate change will. No. We send them to the largest community college in the nation, literally, the Air Force Community College. They learn 2-4 months, get a new certificate, and slam right back in. Why? Because technology changed so rapidly. So technology may become obsolete, but a good solid worker that we've already invested in through public education, often some subsidies to go to, government subsidies, that is never an obsolete person. We just need a little bit more investment. And my party was worried about student loans and not them. They're the engine of our economy. 12 million sit out there without using that. How can we take care of student loans? You bet ya. How? There's a program in government called REPAY, R-E-P-A-Y-E. We don't use it. We should make it mandatory, universal, and grandfather for every student, which mandates that if you're in that program, you never have to pay back more than 10% of your income. And that's after you take away and deduct from your income the equivalent of 150% of poverty level income. So you're down about 7 or 8%. I believe we should reduce that to 5%, and for lower income, forgive it after 20 years. Why? Well, there's only 2% of youth that have graduated since 2003 that have a debt greater than $50,000. 75% only have a debt of $10,000 less. What are we talking about just forgiving all that? You know what I mean? And then the blue-collar worker pays it off with debt. So those begin to get to the 2 critical areas: health security, education security. Climate change, we can pass the new Green Deal here in the next 10 years, and it won't matter if that's all we do. 85% of that global greenhouse emissions comes from abroad. You saw the news article last week that Qatar is air conditioning open-air soccer stadiums, open-air restaurants. Saudi Arabia will use as much energy to power its air conditioning in 1 decade as it exports in oil today. 8% of the tropics has air conditioning. In 2050, 50% will have air conditioning. If they get the common standard air conditioner we sell in America, instead of the most efficient, which uses 2/3 less electricity, if they just get what we mainly sell in Sears, it'll be equivalent to deforesting 2/3 of the Amazon. That's why I say we need somebody, yes, who can unite this country, but also convene the world. Because the greatest threat to mankind is climate change. But we aren't even talking that we have not signed and ratified the Kigali Agreement, which permits developing countries to use hydrofluorocarbons until 2038. We haven't even ratified it, and we're supposed to stop now. And hydrofluorocarbon, one of those carbons is 6,000 times worse than 1 CO2. So, do I believe in policies? You bet I do. But if you want to get these wonderful things where everybody on the stage says, are you for Medicare for all, and they just go like this, the answer is, how do you get there? And can you unite this country to make it happen? I don't want to be a horse whisperer to Mitch McConnell. I want to go over their heads like it did in my district, where 87% were. That's what President Obama did when he campaigned, and maybe we need to do that when you're president. So that first day I'll hold a town hall in the middle of America and let them talk. Then I'll go to Paris and convene the world that day. Then I'll come back and I'm going to announce training for a lifetime, the program. And then I'm going to stop out and I'm going to go into a mosque and say, mind you, fine, I went to war with many people of the Muslim faith. We love you. And then I'm gonna go to an NRA show with Ollie North. I'm gonna call him up, who I knew. He ran my backside when I was down there during the Vietnam era, thinking I was gonna go to boot camp or whether I was gonna be a Marine or not, but I decided not to because you have to cut your hair too short. So I decided to go Navy instead of that. And I say, Ollie, because I stayed friends with him. Well, we may not agree, but I have an F from the NRA, but I'm gonna go in and say, Howard Beeman was right. You have a gun, you have a pistol, you know what I mean, for hunting and safety. I don't want assault weapons, but I want to go there with them and tell them that. They're good Americans. And I just want to tell them that. And then I'm going to go to a Native American reservation where 5,000 women are murdered or disappear every year, and we don't know why. And then I'm going to go to the border, and I'm going to tell, here's what we're going to do. We're going to deploy the Mass Strategy Review Program, which is in there, which says that's what we do when we have our refugees from a hurricane, and the Mass Strategy Care Program, where FEMA goes with Salvation Army and others in the Red Cross, and they take care of the refugees. ICE isn't trained to do this mass thing, but I'm also going to tell ICE. Sometimes, and I met with a woman who takes care of first responders the other day, who time after time has to deal with opioids and other things like that some of them really do get compassionate fatigue. It's a PTSD issue. And say, look, I know this is challenging. You're mighty fine Americans, sometimes we've gone a little rough here. I want to make sure that you're taken care of, but I want to get it back on track. They'll take care of the refugees, do it right, get them to homes, and move forward. How admirable is an invaluable captain of the ship of the President of the United States by totally meeting what he does. And knowing policies is the only way, if we can make it, if we unite this country.
You sound like you have a lot of empathy, but how are you going to, look at, I don't think it's so much in the House of Representatives, but you look at what happens in the Senate. It's like, there is no compassion for anybody. They don't care about anybody else. If they got the tax break, boy, that's good. Too bad for the little guy. I mean, where are we going that, we have to be at the head of the line and it's us first and us always? Where did that come from?
That's a great point in the sense that that's why I said I would tend to go over their heads. It's what I did in my Republican district.
Yeah.
I sent 22 letters or phone calls to the 87 Republican officials, various ones, never got a response. So I held town halls, I went to them, I talked about health care, 10 town halls, I got reelected without a penny. So I intend to hold those town halls all the time. President Obama did this. Remember in Iowa? He had counties that he won by 20 points twice, and Trump's now won by 20. But you can't how you campaign is how you should also govern.
Right.
And so that's why I'm not running
And
an
that's where I
outrage
have
right
a
now.
lot of problems. The other night, we have people promising things that are not realistic at all.
You said it.
When you promise to give somebody $1,000 a month, that's not realistic,
So my thing is, someone asked me, why don't you run an outrage? I said, well, how you campaign is how you can be able to govern. Okay, it doesn't mean I don't disagree. I just put out a tweet, when for example, when the Kurds were abandoned. But you can't find a comment from me my entire time that I was putting down the Republican Party. You can say, I disagree with that immigration policy, okay? I mean, I voted. I mean, I was out there, on television for a bipartisan resolution of this. But I'm going to go to the people. Does it make a difference? They impact. Obama did that for the election twice. But sometimes we get to Washington, they've got so much to do, they forget. It's about getting to them to impact the representatives. This is going to work. I don't see it any other way. We can have all those fine, great things being said as they all raise their hands, and they're good people. Boy, we have somebody who can't unite this country. We're all going to have is executive orders and nothing, and the next guy's going to open their mouth. I've gone on way too long. Sir, I'm happy to stay an hour, but is there a last burning question? Yes, sir. Is that okay if I took one more?
Yeah, no.
Wait, actually, is there a reason you're recording?
So I'm from the Disability Rights Center, and we're doing a project called Disability Unscripted, where we ask the candidates a question about employment for people with disabilities. So is it okay if I record? We've gotten like 19 of the other candidates.
I call him Sean Hannity. I have about 8 times.
So Joe, with 1 in 5 Americans experiencing a disability, what would you do if elected to ensure that people with disabilities are included in your administration and continue to receive employment throughout the country.
Well, it's even broader than that. So first of all, I do what I just answered her question, find things. I've been to 3 disability forums since I've been in this race since 23 June, which I think is great. You, a captain of a ship, goes and shows what's important to him or her, like I go to a prison or a place, that's number one. I think that says a lot, particularly for the only person, first and only person I think in Congress who's ever had Braille cards. My background is that I really do respect and admire people who have disability done so much. I moved the very first money in autism in 12 years, hard cash in the defense budget, over to take care of those who have autism, all right? And so what I believe needs to be done is we need to relook at SSDI and make sure that that is properly funded. We need to make sure that that often $4 that you get for working, for wages, is increased to fair wages. By the way, this is all on my website, all right? Everything I'm saying here, all right? On a paper specifically on those who are disabled. And so I'm a big believer that we also need a lot more research that has done. That's part of the reason that $27 million was moved over, not just for the healthcare, but also research into to better take care of them. And to have them in your administration, absolutely. I would. Can I tell you where? Don't know where. I mean, I have a Trump supporter on my staff. I have to figure out where to put him. Do you know what I mean? But we'll see where it all kind of comes out. Have I answered your question? Did I miss part of it?
No, it's perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. No, this is important because this is truly important. I mean, I even hired, I go to prisons, when I talk about recidivism, I hired someone who was in jail for 10 years in my last Senate campaign. I think you have to put your mouth, whatever that saying is, you know what I mean, what you're talking about. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Ask him a question.
But you know the problem with SSDI, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's immense.
Right.
I mean, you got to Iowa and it's paltry.
Can I ask him a question?
Please.
What are your people on disability asking for? What do they find that they need most that isn't available now? I mean, how can you help them?
So I'm an attorney. I just
Disability, I had one in my district, for example, that I went to about 3 or 4 times. They even took Patrick Kennedy there because, as you know, he had drug and alcohol issue. I wanted to speak about, it wasn't a disability, but it was an addiction issue because we wanted to help. And what you find is they do wonderful work, but they're often paid lower wages. And there's things, but what you want to do is try to get them to be much more fair wages. You find that their ability, particularly after they get 18 and above and they're on their own legally, that housing for them becomes an issue. Because particularly, so therefore the parents has to, particularly with autistic children, there really isn't, once you get above 21, I think it is, it becomes a massive issue as adults. We have very little transitional housing, for example, for them. And then they want things, which is very understandable, that, when I speak to a group that's bigger than this, that we really should have a microphone for them because disability is part of hearing. What we also need to put more in, we had a paucity of physical therapists, occupational therapists, audiologists, and speech therapists. So I put a piece of legislation in that, because this is needed both for our vets coming home with traumatic brain injury and for children with autism. Because there was a paucity, a decreased deficit of 10%. So I took a Republican with me, and this gets to your issue, ma'am. I took a Republican with me, who's an occupational therapist, took him out to see vets, came back and said, there's a law that says if you can find a decrease or, like a deficit of 10% of the specialty, you can forgive $10,000 if they go on for increased education for each year they do it, to learn it better. And so he worked with me to get a bipartisan piece of legislation through. And so you have these specialists in the area of disabilities for autism, traumatic brain injury that can truly help it. There's a lot of ways to do it. My Braille card I had was merely to show that I wanted them to know that I was conscious, which is often a lot of it. They become invisible almost to society, much like those 5,000 missing Native American women are. If they were Caucasian, that'd be on the front page of every newspaper in America. And we don't know why they're disappearing and all. The nice thing about politics is you learn as you go across. You have the most progressive prison. If you sign up, I'll send you an email if you hear, so just put it on my cup of joe. And I just don't walk across the state. I went into the Mental Health Institute over there in Brattleboro. where they have hundreds of badges of first responders, which represented everyone who'd come in for help, including a local sheriff who drove in full regalia, says, I'm about to commit suicide, please help me. And they're hidden, mental health, it's a stigma. You know, that prison, that progressive prison you have here, when the guy gal walks in, just to give you an illustration, and I've been in max security prisons, I've been in my beds all the time, but it's walking down a dang dark place, you know, and there he walks in, and if you're behaving, you sit in a nice room like this, like it's not shackled, police drop you off, as though you are in a doctor's office. If you're misbehaving yourself, you put in one of those 2 holding cells and you're treated just, that guy says, the word when you become a correctional officer, one of the 3 ones is control. What were the other 2? I've forgotten, you learned control. He said, no, it's impossible to control a human being. You can manage them by incentives and disincentives. You're gonna behave from day one, you learn that. You'll be treated, and they're all called sir and ma'am. That guy's been there 27 years and is the model for this state. I mean, things I've learned in your state are wonderful. You should be pretty proud of it. I will end because Walter's gonna yank me out of here. I mean,
I have a question before.
Pardon me, sir?
No, we're fine on time. 'Cause
Okay, because, I mean, I just, to your question, I happen to love policy. Love, he's my policy director, that's why I brought him in. He's also an organic farmer. You want to see an agriculture paper? You come and look at ours. I have a national farm bank, a national land bank, and a sustainable homestead act. You know what I mean? Because if we don't handle more regenerative, organic type of farming, we're also not going to make it. I mean, there's many pieces to this. And, but I believe this, that if I could get back to the overarching issue, because we can have these fine policies, understand these fine policies, but how you convince somebody to do it. So if someone comes up to me, and I ran in a parade over in Iowa, they love parades. I mean, I called a woman one time, went to 15 of them, and says, how many people think along with parades? Because, you know, how many brochures? And he said, well, there'll be more than usual because we haven't had a parade in 4 weeks. Literally said that. I mean, if you grow strawberries more than your next door neighbor, they throw a parade, and they're wonderful people. Iowa Nice is here. So the staff passes these out ahead of me and volunteers, and I run back and forth, says, that's me, how about taking me, you know, home and read about me tonight, you know? One out of 4 will say thank you, but someone every so often, of course, says, well, I just like the wall. And I'll stop, and I'll say, yes, I understand, I want to secure, you know, have safe borders too, but how about our economy? I said, have you ever thought that if it wasn't for the undocumented as well as the documented, since 1970, that we would be in a population death spiral like Japan, that has stagnated its economy because they don't let any immigrants in, and they stagnate. Since 1970, our birth rate in America has not been sufficient to replace those we lose everywhere. And I said, now with the baby boomers going, you know, it's just gonna go down. And I said, you may not agree with it, but I'll tell you, we need them. And the woman said, well, I still believe in the world, I didn't know that. It doesn't mean you're gonna win the vote, but maybe you mitigate their misunderstanding of why these policies are important. And so when you say I'm gonna do some bill in 2 to 4 years, they just remember that we couldn't roll out our website, you know what I mean? And you gotta say transition, how we talk with people matters.
And people need to know that, you know, those people that are there in Congress, whether on one side or the other, that they're accountable. I mean, I can't believe in this day and age, and it speaks to what he was saying, I can't believe in this day and age that there was a commitment of the federal government, and there's a law with regard to special ed, 40%. And how much do you give? 18%? How
correct.
come somebody doesn't say, hey, wait a minute, we have a deficit here that we haven't, you know, owned up to? And when is that gonna happen?
Excellent point, and that's important because education is truly our real homeland defense, and that includes special ed. So I will end with this issue of accountability, all right, with another story because I'm a sailor. And we arrived off Afghanistan, I launched 8 pilots, that very first night. I wanted that strike to go down perfectly. I launched 7 guys that had been in the very first Gulf War. Man, they were pros from Dover, as we say. And they knew just how to make sure it was safe and done well. But I also funneled in what we call a nugget. Somebody who's not been off a carrier deck over a foreign country before. She was 26 years old. They didn't have women on ships, some of mine are flying the most advanced fighter aircraft. you know, when I joined up when I joined up during the Vietnam era. And she was the one that disobeyed my orders that night, that I had passed down from on high, that said nobody dives below 20,000 feet. Because we knew the Taliban, who had previously been labeled the Mujahideen, had been given by the United States Stinger missiles when they were fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And they were still down there. We knew that they only went to 18,000 feet, so before they dove low, I wanted to have time to have an electronic emissions detecting plane move over. We didn't have as many of them, and you only have one or two up, to get over there, see if there's anything there before you dive down. But 8 special forces had been ambushed. 4 died immediately. And the other 4 called up and said, we have moments left. We've been ambushed. Somebody just died. Strafe. No lasers. They're too close already. The guys asked permission. That woman, that brand new pilot, felt she couldn't wait. And she dove 3 times from 20,000 feet to 3,000 feet in the middle of the night and came up and strafed. And as I told Sean Hannity when I was on his show, and he said, what about women in combat positions that President Obama was opening up? Wouldn't this just political correctness? As I clued the story in a short rendition to him, I said, Sean, those 4 special forces didn't care who saved their butt that night. But if she hadn't been given her equal opportunity to be all she might be, equity, equality, the common good of America and the mission wouldn't have been accomplished that night. And second, to your wonderful point, that woman was willing to always remember. Ultimately, it was about people, in her case, those special forces that she was accountable to. Above self, her career, for disobeying an order. Never mind her life. And I had given orders that probably should have been different. Use your judgment. But she was willing to be accountable no matter the consequences to herself. I believe that's what this country does need. The people want to feel that way, or there's no way we'll get these policies through. So I will end with the wise words of John McCain, who's a fellow Naval Academy graduate. He used to call when I was running for Senate, even though he was Republican, but I was Democrat. You know, he was very kind and called every so often and passed on wise words of advice. Hey, Joe, he said one time, as only John McCain could have. I saw you on television. You're still too long. Keep it shorter. And Walter, I'm sorry. I love policy. My
Okay, thank you.
Well, if you do have that question, send an email. We'll